Hi, my name is Hubert Lurich. I'm professor of political science, author of An Introduction to Political Philosophy, and senior fellow of the Bastiat Institute. This is the first video of a series of videos on the state. In today's lecture, I discuss the nature of the state. When we think of the state, we usually do not have a precise idea of what the state is. We think of a specific appearance, which we may even burden with value judgments, like when Democrats say democracy, one such specific appearance, is the best of all governments. Obviously, a monarchist would strongly disagree and say that monarchy, another such specific appearance, is the best of all governments. As interesting as it is to look into the respective arguments put forth pro or con a specific appearance, from now on we will call it system for simplicity, as interesting it is to reflect on what all these or possible systems share. This inevitably leads us to the question, what is the state? Or in other words, what is the very essence, the nature of the state? We may try to find the common denominator of all political systems by comparing them and logically derive the one and only system contained in all of them. Such an approach is by no means new. Plato, the father of political science, did just that in the Republic. He compared four political systems, timarchy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny, took all the positives from them and got his ideal republic that he called aristocracy, because he composed it of all the best, the Greek word for best is aristos, features of the four systems under scrutiny. Different from Plato, we do not aim at the best system, in classical jargon, constitution, or the worst, or any other in between for that matter, but at what all by necessity have in common in order to be called political systems. The Greeks could not imagine a civilized world without the polis, or a city-state. Aristotle's definition of man as zoon politikon seems to suggest that man is a political being. A comparison between political systems should then allow us to determine the essential features of the state. Aristotle himself described and compared some 200 different Greek city-states. A second way of determining the constituent features of the state is by starting with anarchy. Another Greek word literally meaning no rule. The tabula rasa, or clean slate approach, has the advantage of being unbiased. We do not have to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of preferred political systems. Actually, our own personal preferences are of no importance, and hence there is no room for value judgment. The question to begin with would simply be, what distinguishes political organization from other forms of organization? A third way of examining the nature of the state would be to define its features. We may be guided by historical evidence or logic. The outcome of the empirical or theoretical approach should be identical, which is a definition of the state. By defining what the state is, we also define what the state is not, so that in future lectures we can systematically build on these premises. I hope that in this short introduction I could clarify why this video is dedicated to the nature of the state. The nature of the state. What is the state? To most living in a political collective, such a question sounds bizarre. To some even offensive. We are the state, of course, they believe naively. And indeed, their perception seems to confirm them. They all hold the same passport. They all learn the same at school. They all speak the same language. And there are many more such things feeding into a national identity. However, would we define the state in exactly the same way before the age of nationalism, which, somewhat hesitatingly, began with the French Revolution a little over 200 years ago? The answer can only be a clear no. So we are back to our original question. What is the state? If the state is not identical with a political collective, it can either be a part of it or an alien element. Historically speaking, there are good arguments for the second assumption. The state came into existence as the most important result of an encounter between conquerors and producers, whereby the conquest was invited by a sharp distinction between the two in respect to specialization. In addition to the means employed, this encounter also required a discrepancy in productivity. The less productive nomadic tribesmen specializing in aggression were attracted by more productive sedentary or village communities specializing in the production of wealth. In some cases, the intrusion was temporary, for instance, annual raids. In others, they became permanent. In the second case, we would speak of a state. The state, by force or intimidation, thus made itself leading part of a political collective. Actually transformed government into state. Usually, this merger between two different communities finds its expression in either the destruction of one elite at the expense of the other, or amalgamation of the two elites, or a mixture of both. It also finds its visible expression in cities, which acquire the dual function of power and distribution centers. Distribution because production continued to happen in the villages. But with the growth and splendor of cities, power, after all, needed legitimacy. Production other than of foodstuffs was also stimulated in the new urban centers. Now that we trace back the origin of urban civilization and state to the same root, conquest, the exclusivity of power becomes understandable. Architecture and symbolism support this important point vividly. Even where we do not speak of the Forbidden City, access to the power center was strictly controlled. until the present day, and irrespective of the political system, can we easily find symbols of power whose sole purpose is to draw a line between the state and society. The sheer size and sometimes even the appearance of buildings, the weight and size of doors inside, the religious or quasi-religious symbolism, the armed guards at the entrance, and many more such subtle details. So far, we have questioned some common opinions about the state. In the next step, we classify these assumptions about the state and discard them one by one as unfounded and thus false. At the end of the lecture, we resume above discussion, but put it on a theoretical rather than historical basis. Man and state, so an assumption that goes at least back to Plato, are complementary. Wherever we have man in a sizable number, the state seems to come in. Thus, all evidence points to the state as a natural phenomenon. The following 5 explanations of the state show why we came to accept the state as natural.